So we're going to have a time of Q&A right now, and it's going to be led and moderated by Joshua Gilo over here from the Truth Exchange. And so I just want to mention in your packet, you have the bios for the panel. So we're not going to spend a lot of time introducing people right now, but I'll hand it over to Joshua.
Thank you, Dean. What we'd like to do right now is at this time, if you have filled out a 3x5 card with a question, I'd like to go ahead and collect those. As I'm collecting, I'm also going to be looking around if you didn't take the time to do so and have a question already, I'll go ahead and take that question now.
I have a question for Rabi. My understanding is you used to be a real Hindu. Is that true? So I'd love to have your perspective on this, since you seem to be a person that would have legitimate knowledge of the truth.
Sivananda, whom I cited about the mind, was his personal guru.
Our family's guru, yeah. Well, you want my perspective on this, meaning all of this. You have about 5 hours?
I got 5 hours later.
You know, I was sitting there listening to you folks, and I have to say I'm so thrilled, totally thrilled. This is exciting. And you guys have done a really fabulous job. I whispered to Peter, I told him you did such a great job, we need to have you speak all over this country. And, you know, he's done a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of reading. One thing that I was reminded of listening to all of this was that I feel so sad, not just about what's happening here, but I feel so sad that the majority of Christians in this country are lazy. You can quote me if you like. You can beat me up. You can really beat me up if you like for that. But I've been all over this country. I've spoken in every state of this great country over the years. And, you know, we sit back, we fold our arms, we take it easy. 90+% of the church, if not more. You know, it's almost like the whole church. I don't know what's going on. We're like in a daze. We're in another world. It's all about hedonism again. Take it easy. Live the good life. Enjoy life. It's the only life you got, you know. Well, that's for you. That's not for me. Right, Peter? This is not the only life we've got. But we behave like it's the only life we've got. It goes on beyond here. And it's just so sad to see the church taking it easy and doing not much. And here with this situation in Encinitas, you can't afford to sit back and relax. You cannot. You have to act. You have to do something. I have paid the price a few times in this country. I didn't really know this country much. I read some literature. I read the papers before I came. And the things you read in the papers is not the real America, you know. The journalists put what they want. When I came here, it was a whole different life. And I paid some big prices in this country with my wife because I didn't act. I lost money, not big amounts, which is missionaries with small you know, financing, but I lost money, $200 here, $500 there, because I didn't act. Everything is so designed to get your money. It's so designed to get your money. They send you this letter, and if you don't read the fine line at the bottom that you have to act by a certain date, you think, oh, I got a few months, you know, I'll take care of this when I have time. And then 2 weeks later, you lost your money. You subscribe to something, or rather they send you something free in the mail, and they assume that you're going to continue with the subscription. If you don't cancel that subscription, you have to pay the bill. That kind of thing I mean. And so in the church, in the kingdom, the lack of action is costing us so much. And we keep losing territory. We keep losing territory, spiritually speaking. And the people who have been deceived here, they end up in a different camp. You know, recently I made the statement, in America, either you're in God's camp, and I say this very carefully, but I mean it very sincerely, or you're in Oprah Winfrey's camp. Think about it. She is the goddess of the New Age movement. She is the Pope of New Ageism, influencing millions and millions and millions of people all across this country and all across the world. In 146 countries every day her program airs. And you know why she's so successful? Because she is not lazy, she acts. She's always busy, she's always creating, always producing. We can learn from her. We can take on that challenge. So, on the one hand, I have to say, yes, I fully endorse what I've seen here this morning. It is exciting. On the other hand, I have to say we as the church face a major challenge to make a complete turnaround. You keep driving in the wrong direction and you keep going. You know, in Illinois, I once drove in the wrong direction for 3 whole hours. Only because I didn't have the courage to turn around. I kept thinking, well, it'll come, it'll come, it'll come. I pulled in at a gas station and I said, you're long past it, sir. I should have turned around when I had the first feeling I should turn around, you know. And in the church, it's not too late. Jesus hasn't come back yet. It's not too late.
Okay, this next question is for Dr. Peter Jones. How can we address yoga and the Eastern worldview through a presuppositional, and if you could define that for us, approach to reveal its internal inconsistencies to eventually get to preaching the gospel?
I think it's just one occasion among many that we face today of expounding to people the biblical worldview over against this timeless pagan worldview. I don't think it's that difficult to show that yoga does not presuppose God the Creator in any sense of the imagination. And thus, we can begin to ask people who are being tempted by yoga, what do they actually believe about the world? What makes them think that they are so right? Why do they think yoga holds the secret? And get them telling you about the way they put the world together. And then confront them with a biblical worldview, what I call twoism, which to me is the only worldview that makes sense. So I think it's a wonderful occasion, really, for you to take your friends and ask them to expound their worldview and then share the gospel.
Islam and Judaism don't appear to fit.
That's right.
It's
a somewhat long answer. I have it. I'm not sure we have the time. For the moment, let me just say this. They are false twoisms because their view of God is totally wacky. And because of that, they're tending towards oneism. And many of the more powerful expressions of these two religions end up in oneism. In particular, Sufism, by the way, which is their false twoism.
This next question is towards Dean. What can individuals do to be involved to help? Is there petitions to be signed? Is there meetings that we can attend? What's the next step? Concerned parents, just concerned individuals, what should we do?
There's a lot of different tracks that are going on right now. One is the litigation track, and that case is on appeal right now, and we'll have probably a ruling by the end of 2014, end of this year. And then depending on that ruling, it may be appealed to the state Supreme Court and maybe ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court. So the legal process is going forward. To help with that, please, first of all, pray. Secondly, if you can support, we have a SEDLOC Legal Defense Fund set up to help pay the costs for that. All of our time in the case is for free, but we have litigation costs involved with that. But as far as education, the parents in Encinitas are getting organized more and more, and they've developed a website with a lot of great links and a lot of great information, a lot of which has been presented today. So there's a lot of educational opportunities coming up. But what I would do, what I would encourage you to do is connect with either Jennifer Sedlock or myself through the National Center for Law and Policy, and talk about your unique gifts or abilities or talents. As far as education, the biggest thing we're going to be talking about going forward as far as Christian leaders is for the pastors themselves to become educated by coming to things like this today, by reading the books that Ravi mentioned earlier, so that they can educate their flocks to act in discernment and wisdom. Because the biggest problem that I've seen in my last year and a half of working on this project is there's a complete, to not maybe not put it nicely, but there's a deep ignorance amongst Christians and Christian leaders as to what Hinduism is and what yoga is, and so there's a huge educational curve that we need to have. So the more Christian leaders and Christians who become educated and engaged and understand the biblical worldview better and understand Hinduism and Winism better, will be able to respond to it as the body of Christ. But it's a big problem right now. If we, as I said earlier, if we don't figure out the response to it biblically, and I think we've been discussing that today a lot, it's going to be a big problem. But there's a lot of things. Let me ask Jennifer to speak to that on the parent end, how you can help.
How they can help with what? It's on. Well, we've started. I don't think this is this on? We've started a new ministry. It's called Yoga Awareness, which you have the website right inside. That will be launching soon. It's not up yet. We are next, in 2 weeks, we're going to be educating pastors' wives and women's ministry leaders on January 27th, and that flyer is in your folder as well. So that's our start, because the yoga is coming in through the women into the churches. It's not coming through the kids. It's not coming through the men. It's coming in through the women. And therefore, perhaps that's why God chose a women's event speaker to help lead this and move the Army forward. I'm not sure exactly where it's headed, but that event is coming. And then we are available as a panel. We have more women than this and men involved that will be available for those kinds of events. I mean, this is a new birth ministry to spread this message as long or as far or as wide, whatever God's plans are. We don't really know what those are, and not sure I would want to know too much, because this is a big issue, and this is huge. So that's some of it. Can you add more?
I think our biggest heart is just God has a heart for people, and you spread the gospel message one person at a time by walking through life and living life with them. And now you have been given either new information or just heard information that you already knew confirmed, and now God's going to challenge you. What are you going to do with that information? Maybe he's going to put people in your life that you already have relationships with that are maybe struggling with their belief about God. Maybe they're Christian brothers and sisters, and they're struggling in their own heart and not really understanding how the choices they make, even just for an exercise, are impacting their relationship with the Lord. And so I think it's not even a mass movement so much as it is just, as Christians, Christ is calling us to speak the truth in love, boldly, and just walk through people with life. And I love what Peter said, where he said, start talking to them about, you know, what they get from yoga and why they go to it, and then challenge that. And I think it's just, this is a spiritual battle, and it's gonna happen with God, and it's gonna happen through prayer, and it's gonna happen through the courage to just talk to people beyond surface related items, and carving out time for people in our lives.
Question?
Okay, this next question is for Rabi. Can some of the yoga exercises be used without worship of gods, demons, etc.?
Thank you. Well, you really cannot separate the physical from the spiritual in yoga. Yoga is what it is. It's yoga. It is religious. It is at the heart and soul of Hinduism. There's no Hinduism without yoga, and there's no yoga without Hinduism. If you are going to do exercises that may benefit you physically, go ahead and do it, but don't call it yoga. Don't call it yoga. It's not yoga. You could stand on your head for 2 hours. It's not yoga if you're just doing it for some physical benefit. The Indian government right now is taking steps. They're very upset by Westerners and what's happening here, using yoga for physical benefits only. They feel very insulted. They feel very offended that so many Westerners are into yoga for physical and other benefits other than spiritual. The Malaysian government has now banned yoga from Malaysia. Of course, that's the other extreme, because they have done their research and concluded it is religious, and they don't want their Muslim people getting into yoga. Thank you for laughing. They don't want to lose their Muslim people to yoga, because they know once their Muslim people get into yoga, they'll end up in the Hindu camp. And I can give you dozens of examples like that. But the most powerful one is the Indian government. No, you can't separate it. And so I am all for physical well-being. I exercise every day. I walk. You know, I travel a lot, and I sit on airplanes for 8 and 10 hours, and it's awful to be sitting that long. As soon as I get out of an airplane, I want to exercise. I want to walk and so on. I do my own routine every day, but it has nothing to do with yoga. In fact, the word yoga, if I could add a little bit to the definition we already heard today, yoga is yoking with Brahman. Brahman is not just translated divine. Brahman is the Hindu concept of God, which is totally opposite to the biblical definition of God. Brahman is the universal soul, the absolute universal soul that's all and everything. As Pete already said, it's pantheistic. All is God, pan from Greek, all, theos is God, everything is God. And in fact, Krishna says in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, everything that is, I am everything that is, and I am everything that is not. So a different level of pantheism. Everything that is not, I also am. And that's Brahman. So don't let this word divine fool you. You're in a whole other camp when you enter this Hindu divine. Let me add one statement here that I think is really, really important. Yoga, as innocent as it may seem to some people, has the power to draw the practicant into Hinduism. So you may go to a yoga class, a yoga center for the physical benefits and to relax and all that, but somehow eventually that yoga has the power to draw you into Hinduism. You will not call yourself a Hindu. Most of the New Agers in America who follow Hinduism don't call themselves Hindus, but you end up in the Hindu camp. You know, people converted to Islam call themselves Muslims. People converted to Buddhism, and there's plenty of it in Hollywood and all over the country, call themselves Buddhists. But there are more converts in America to Hinduism than to Islam and Buddhism put together. But they do not call themselves Hindus. Shirley MacLaine doesn't say I'm a Hindu, but by virtue of what she believes, she's absolutely a Hindu. And Oprah Winfrey too. She may call herself Christian, but she really is a Hindu.
Rabi?
Yes.
If I can just simply tack on to some of what you're saying with regard to whether we can practice just the physical exercise parts of yoga and separate it. And I love how clear you've made it that you can't separate them out. And I've had a lot of opportunity to kind of pursue this train of thought because I have a very, very close friend who is a believer and also owns a yoga studio. And so in thinking through this for the last 2 years and talking about it, the question that comes up a lot is, well, but can't it be redeemed? And 1 Corinthians comes up a lot. And Dean had mentioned in his presentation, you're the meat. And just to clarify on that, a lot of people think about meat being sacrificed to idols, and therefore yoga is something that we can take and we can redeem. But we are actually, by practicing yoga, by doing those moves, practicing in the ritual. So what was happening with the meat is that it was going through ritual sacrifice that was making it unclean, and that's what they were trying to deal with. We're given liberty in some of those places, but in practicing yoga, you're actually taking your body and you are taking it through that sacrificial ritual. You are sacrificially offering yourself up. And when we think about idolatry as Christians too, in the second commandment, we're told not to create any graven images. Well, in yoga, you're actually making your body a graven image. You are taking on the images and the forms of gods and deities and mythologies within Hinduism. And so there's a lot of crossover there, but I would encourage us too as Christians not just to think about whether we personally are being tainted or affected. I think it's very easy for us to think, well, some people might be drawn into Hinduism, but I wouldn't. Or maybe I'm the only egotistical one who thinks like that. But I think it's easy to think like that. But again, going back to 1 Corinthians, and if you read through 1 Corinthians 8 all the way through 10, Paul's point is you might personally have liberty, but you can't only be concerned about yourself. You must also be concerned about your witness to fellow believers. So there are going to be, especially given our culture, so many people who are coming out of the New Age, who are coming out of Hinduism, who are coming out of these alternative spiritual backgrounds. And if they see you as a strong Christian to whom they look up, and they feel because you're participating in yoga or don't necessarily have a problem with yoga, that they can participate too, they may be affected, and you are responsible for that. And two, the other example that Paul used in that passage is when you are with unbelievers and they're offering meat that's been sacrificed to idols, if you know that it's been sacrificed to an idol, you shouldn't eat it because it will affect your witness. And so it's not just about your personal holiness, but your witness to unbelievers. So think about going to a studio, saying to someone that you don't inherently have a problem with yoga. If they're not a believer, then your witness to them is that the things you believe are in no conflict with the things then that they're going to run into when they practice yoga. So I think that it's a bit of a mistaken question to ask, can we just do the exercises and not be affected? Because you're ignoring like 3/4 of the issue when you're only thinking about your own personal holiness. So there is a booklet that you've been given for free. It's in all of your folders where I just sort of struggled through a lot of these questions just in the conversations that we as parents have had within the district and within churches and friends who approach us quietly and are concerned about the things that we're saying. And so I tried to kind of put in concise form some of what I've worked through in this and working with Dr. Jones at Truth Exchange to put it in coherent format, and we deal with some of that in that booklet. So I hope it's of use to you.
I just wanted to add something to that really quickly, because as I was reviewing the scriptures this week, 1 Corinthians 10 really leaped out at me. And where Paul is finishing up the conversation about meat sacrificed to idols, he says, if I can read this because I'm going blind, starting in verse, I believe, 18, consider the people of Israel, do not those who eat sacrifices participate in the altar. Do I mean that a sacrifice offered to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but the sacrifice of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. And so it's obviously connecting these types of behaviors and practices with the demonic, but it's also saying we can't mix the two. And that's exactly what happens when Christians participate in yoga.
Add something here, please. Recently I spoke to a professor on the East Coast, Ivy League professor, who's an agnostic, but he got into yoga and he got into meditation. I spent a few days with him in discussion. We stayed in the same place and had breakfast together number of times. And he said to me, You know, when I meditate, I find myself floating up and I find myself encountering entities. He's an agnostic. He was an atheist at one time, now sort of a agnostic, and telling me he's encountering entities. Well, that's what I experienced as a Hindu. When I meditated, my world eventually, in fact, through meditation became a world of mysticism, basically. And I meditated to have these mystical experiences. And the more I had them, the more I wanted to meditate to have them. My mantra, by the way, and all mantras are in Sanskrit, was Aham Brahma Asmi. Translated, it means, you ready for it? I am God. And I repeated this mantra thousands and thousands of times until I really began to believe it, that I am divine. So you go to the yoga centers, yoga class, the yoga teacher, and all across America, it's the same basically. They'll tell you it has nothing to do with religion. But the second lecture, the second class, they will tell you need to be quiet and look into yourself to find a true self, spelled with a capital S. Why, if you ask the teacher? To find God. In fact, the teacher will tell you that. Find the true self to find God, because in Hindu philosophy, self equals God. It's what Satan wants us to believe. Just the opposite of what the Bible teaches. You are God. Go ahead and discover that you are God through yoga, through meditation. Meditation is part of yoga. There are different schools of yoga, as you now know. Meditation is always part of yoga, and there is a school of yoga which is really meditation. And most people here in America who get deep into yoga end up meditating on Hindu gods and mantras. By the way, Shiva, a lot of New Agers meditate on Shiva. I think you mentioned Shiva earlier on, yes. Shiva is the destroyer of Hinduism. The Hindu scripture tells you he is the destroyer. And we Christians know who the destroyer is. So when you get into Shiva, you're really getting into Satan. And I like the point you're raising here. It's very, very important. Demons are at work today, and we Christians must be aware of it.
Thank you. This next question is directed for Dr. Peter Jones, and perhaps some of the mothers can answer this question as well. What should be our attitude towards Christians who disagree?
I want to pass that over to the ladies.
What should our attitude?
Over to the
We could all answer that. How about Samantha?
I already did. Give me the hard one. Thank you. I think the most important thing about this entire issue is not condemning or judging or just disrespecting other people, but showing truth and love. So I think just education is huge. I would say, as a parent who has a child in a school district, one of the things that I find an easier inroad is to talk about the kids, because at this point you have a admittedly Hindu organization whose sole interest is to move these kids away from our God and into a Hindu belief system. Now, whether that's spoken of or not, that is their goal, and it's been written that that is their goal. So based on that, you can look at 6,000 children from 4 and 5 years old to 12 and 13 years old who are now put in a class with teachers teaching these asanas. And again, practice brings you to God, whether you want it or not, over a period of time. So you have children at these ages going to asana twice a week, every week, for potentially the 7 years of their growing up, listening to teachers they respect, doing a practice that then becomes very natural to them, very seamless. It's how they cope. They're also building into the classroom. It's how you cope with life, looking at everything through the lens of yoga. There are some great things, character traits, all these wondrous terms they come up with that sound like a crossover to Christianity as well. Love each other. Don't judge each other. Respect each other. So a lot of people are getting caught in they're sending these great messages. That's good. But what they're doing is they are pulling children away from God, from the Lord, from Jesus Christ, and from the Holy Spirit. So my personal take on it is I just go from the children's aspect, and you as an adult have education, discernment, and perception to decide. And it's between you and God at that point. I can't step in and judge you. I can't tell you you're going to go to hell if you do this. I mean, I don't, It's about you. It's about you and your relationship with Christ. But I can step in and say, if you give the time and energy to research, just get on your computer and research for your children's sake, there's no way that you can't come out understanding what this truly is. And in that case, it can truly affect how you view your doing yoga as well. You know, you've got kids in the school who have Christian parents. I've personally pulled my child out. She's never done yoga at all. It's been fine for us, but it is a laborious thing to do at school. You're judged. They really try to convince you to stay in. Come on, just come to a class as a parent. They make you feel ousted a little bit. So your child can feel that way too. But it is a great opening dialogue with your kids to talk about Christ and how we stand up for Christ, how we don't judge the kids who do yoga. We love those kids. It has nothing to do with them. We don't judge the yoga teacher. The yoga teacher's not a bad person, but she's lost. So it's just, again, it's educating, I think, our kids. It's stepping in, giving our kids a sense of what's right, raising them to look to Christ only and not all these other things that is trying to be shoved down their throat in our public school system. And guaranteed, Encinitas is the first stop for this. So it's not just about our kids. It's about the other 6,000 kids in our district. So that would be the way I would answer the question.
It really is an opportunity to share the gospel. And Peter was talking a lot about the erasing of distinctions that happens. And what I've found is that there have been opportunities to have conversations with both believing and unbelieving parents who are involved in yoga and appreciate yoga, to talk to them and talk them through this kind of coexist idea that really ultimately it's all the same, and to start teasing out those differences again. And so it is true, if you think that yoga is a good thing, or if you're not a believer, you are lost. And so those differences need to be made. And so and another important thing, I think, and then I'll pass it over to you, is just to remember that the Lord, he takes his particular time with each one of us. And so looking at myself and knowing how incredibly hard-headed or deceived I've been about things, and how long the Lord graciously walked with me, and by my side, even as I was really doing some idiotic stuff, quite frankly, I have to remember that about myself, that just because I'm a believer and I've researched these things doesn't make me right or able to judge in any way. It just means that I'm in a different part of the process, and that, so there are going to be people who are just, you're crazy, yoga's fine, I don't want to talk to you. That's fine. There are other people who are going to come and they're going to want to talk about it, and they're going to have questions for you. That's great. The Lord's doing something else with them. But just to remember God's sovereignty over the entire process, I think takes the weight and the onus off of us, because then we can get very reactionary, and it can be very hard. It's hard not to get angry because we're defending our kids. But just to remember God's graciousness and timing in all of this has been personally helpful for me. So. Covered it.
I'll share a few items too, because I'm kind of a bottom line results person. I come from management, and I want to know the bottom line, and I want to get to the point. And the point is, a lot of our fears and concerns about what would happen in the district if we started doing yoga are starting to happen. I'll share with you just a few. Yoga was, we found that the American Yoga Institution said yoga is not good for children under 16. They say that, yet yoga is everywhere. When the American, institution says that, yoga institution. In addition, Mayo Clinic said there's 2 forms children should not do, Ashtanga and hot yoga. Okay, now you can't find that on their website, not sure why, but it was in our original links. And the results in the district are, we have our first injury that just happened, and it happened to a young girl's hips, because you should not be doing that type of yoga at that age. And she is now out of sports for at least 6 months, and the doctor said could only be from yoga or running. She doesn't run. We have so many concerns we had in the beginning were, I had a 6th grade boy last year. There's bending over, there's no special clothes that they wear. They don't wear yoga clothes to school, right? So there's all kinds of sexual implications with 5th and 6th grade kids in these classes together because you go with your class. So my concern is, why are they doing all these things in the same classroom? Sanity was brought up because sanitation, because they're using mat after mat after mat. Sanity should be questioned. Sorry. Prophetic words. No, the sanitation was brought up because they're using the mats. They had no plan for cleaning them, and you've got 6 classes in a row. In addition, we had teachers coming out within the first month or two saying, this is nuts. There's 35 people in some of these classes, and they're doubling up the classes. So sometimes you've got, 40, 50, 60 kids in a class. No one teaches that way in a yoga studio. So the teachers were throwing their arms up. These are the yoga teachers, not district certified teachers, which one of the things in court we looked at too is you should never have a person in a room alone with children.